Good afternoon, members. My name is Marcus James. I manage Office and Administrative Services here at ACA, and I welcome you to this edition of the ACA member webinar. Attendees are in listen-only mode. Please enter your questions in the questions dialog box, and our presenters will answer those toward the end of the webinar. There's also a brief survey at the end, and we would appreciate your feedback. Finally, as we advance slides, you may notice a lag in your local view. That will most likely be because of bandwidth, but if we have a problem on our end, we'll let you know and update you accordingly. Now I'm going to hand this over to Heidi McAuliffe. Heidi is ACA's Vice President of Government Affairs, and Heidi is going to tell us a bit about today's presenters. Heidi?
Thank you, Marcus. We are really pleased today to have some leaders from the ChemQuest group. Our presenter today is Bob Kramer, a director with ChemQuest, who supports clients in the firm's operational and manufacturing efficiencies business pillar. Bob joined ChemQuest in 2022, following a 40-year career in the polymer converting industry, where he developed extensive global experience in operational management, driving enhanced business productivity and product development across diverse corporate environments. Also joining us is Edie Fox Abrams, ChemQuest Vice President of Business Development and Marketing. Edie has 25 years of experience in specialty chemicals and materials and has been a respected member of the ChemQuest executive leadership team since 2015. With market expertise and insight that is valued by numerous industry publications, trade organizations, and institutions, she supports ChemQuest's client base to generate growth and profitability. Our Q&A segment today will include Pete Smith, a ChemQuest director who has extensive global leadership experience in operations and manufacturing management, including lean manufacturing, process development, logistics, and engineering in the chemical coatings and adhesive industries, as well as ChemQuest Director Joel Chertoff. Joel is an established expert in manufacturing operational efficiencies and methodologies, with a track record that includes successes in new product development, mergers and acquisitions, new business ventures and teams, and much, much more. I'm going to hand it over to our ChemQuest team, Edie, to get us started.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Heidi. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, the second in our series on manufacturing and operational excellence. Today's topic is optimizing plant operations, including design considerations for growth. Our team is excited and happy to be here and appreciates everyone's flexibility due to the necessary rescheduling following last week's technical challenges. Next slide, please, Marcus. Oh, there we are, sorry. I just would like to remind viewers that we have 2 more webinars remaining in the series after today's presentation. After a break in August, we will resume on Tuesday, September 19th to discuss optimizing supply chain to increase the bottom line, and then again on Tuesday, October 17th for Safety First, best practices in environmental health and safety. Please use links provided by the ACA to register individually for these events. I'd also like to mention that the team welcomes feedback and/or private questions on the subject matter of all 4 webinars. We can also provide a link to each of the webinars as requested. Our contact info will be shared at the end of the presentation, and please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone. We'd love to be in direct contact. Next slide, please. For those of you less familiar with ChemQuest, I just want to take a moment to introduce you to our firm. ChemQuest is a global consulting firm serving the specialty chemicals markets. Our expertise lies in navigating the intersection of strategy, markets, operations, and technology through services offered in 4 pillars: business strategy and transformation, external technology development, operational and manufacturing efficiencies, and M&A advisory services for both buy and sell side. Our team is 130 plus people strong, and everyone has a minimum of 25 years business experience, primarily from a technical or C-suite level. Our team members are former business owners, vice presidents of R&D, technology, marketing, or operations and such. We have been in your shoes, and we understand the challenges you face on a daily basis. We love our industry, and that's why we choose to continue to support it at this point in our careers. And all of our work is protected under NDA, with project and client confidentiality being of the utmost importance. Any technical IP developed belongs to our client. So now let's get on with the show as I turn things over to Bob Kramer.
Thank you, Reedy. Next slide, Marcus. So good afternoon, everybody. Good day, wherever you're at. And just want to start off by kind of setting a little bit of the stage for what we're going to cover today. A little bit of an extension from our first webinar where we talked a lot about performance, metrics, KPIs, how to really continuous improvement in all those areas. We'll touch on that a little bit today, but the primary focus is going to be on growth and expansion into new and or existing capacities. So the first thing that I would suggest before you do any of the deep dive into the expansion or purchase of a new business or new plant is take a look at your existing performance in your manufacturing and really make sure that you're using the right baseline before you start investing. It's really important that if you're underperforming in some way, that you're taking a look at that and addressing that, those key factors. And what I would say is review your historical run rates and renew trends and review your trends. Make sure you have a good understanding of what that is. You always want to analyze your current outputs against nameplate capacities to determine the potential gaps in underperforming assets. And then the most important thing is once you understand what those gaps are, you act on them, you take action, and you improve them so that when you do go into the new initiative, you're going into it with a head of steam with your existing performance. And then build what if. I would suggest doing some what if scenarios with those new numbers and those expected outputs with the improvements. That will show the increased productivity that you're going into that new acquisition and or expansion. That's on the manufacturing side. When you get another expansion, could also be a warehouse expansion. And so often it's you know we tend to build or we look at building warehouse expansion against maybe not the best overall circumstances. So you want to make sure that when you're building new warehouse capacity, because that's added cost that typically doesn't going to give you a return. You don't want to have in your existing formulas overproduction. You don't want to be carrying obsolete inventory. You might be having logistics issues that need to be addressed before you go ahead and expand in warehouse. And then there could be another slew of things as far as the warehouse side before you do that as well. So let's just make sure we clean the slate and get a good baseline moving forward. Next slide. So what we're going to talk about today, this is a very busy slide, but it's important just to set the framework for all of what we see, the key elements that you want to go through when you're looking at expanding for growth. Market demand obviously is something you want to make sure is there. Capacity assessment, financial feasibility, is there an ROI on the project? Site locations, facility design, layout, staffing, you know, you have the right people, the right team. Yeah, your EH&S considerations, very important. Supply chain management, risk management, to make sure that you're doing the things in case something goes wrong. Not every plan lays out the way it initially would like to be going. Project management is also a key part as the project is ongoing. Long-term scalability, we'll talk about that, as well as technical considerations, technology, and to include automation. Next slide. So let's talk about market demand. Depending on the size of your organization, the expertise level that you might have within your group, you really, typically in the manufacturing side, you're going to be needing some help in this area. Manufacturing people tend to be more on the engineering and the production side, but in a small business that might be, you might be wearing all those hats to include market demand. So the first thing you want to do is review your internal projections using both historical run rates and your future forecasts. Make sure you understand what you're currently doing, but that's not going to be good enough. You need to use external forecasting. possibly by using a third party such as ChemQuest that specializes in independent and objective fact finding. You want to perform a competitor analysis using both unbiased internal and external resource to make sure there's proper demand for industry capacity. And lastly, I would talk with your existing customers and potential targets for growth forecasts and trends. If you just use run rate, you may not get the perfect picture. You want to make sure that the demand is there, and really one of the best ways is looking at market information, but also talking to your customers who are the ones who are going to have to make that commitment to you if you're going to expand in the future. Next slide. So going back to what I said initially, you really want to make sure that you have a good grip on your existing performance and capacities. So what do? You make sure your production performance and you identify those constraints and bottlenecks. You fix the problems, and then you recalculate your outputs based on those improvements being in place. Things such as what we talked about in the first webinar: yields, cycle times, turnaround and downtime, maintenance, all those fundamentals, first time right, all those fundamentals of what I'll call operations 101 when you're driving a business need to be at their optimal performance before you're going to invest. And then, then after that's all done and you feel good about that, before you move on, you want to make sure you're performing rough initial capacity requirements to meet projected demand. So now you're ready to start to roll up your sleeves and get to work on some of the more, I'll say tangible type things going forward. Next slide. So the first thing that I would do before I get too far along, taking all those assumptions that we just talked about, having the best, forecasting tools you've put in place, you really want to do an ROI and the financial feasibility on your investment. Things such as your capital expenditures, which might include your construction costs, your land and your buildings, equipment, all those add into the CAPEX equation on what your investment's going to be. You also want to look at your operational expenses, which are non-capital and are ongoing day in, day out, to include things such as labor, utilities, raw materials, and really other ongoing expenses to make sure that business model is giving you the output that you expect going into that investment. And then you want to determine if the expansion is viable and aligns with the company's profitability expectations and long-term strategy, including, I would include the accounting and controlling support as much as possible to get some of those financial figures if you have that type of organization where you can get that. I can say firsthand, early in my career, I was involved in a pretty significant project. It was about 2 years along in determining a major expansion. And it wasn't until we really got the right people from a financial standpoint to look at the ROI and the return that it was determined that even though all of the market feasibility and all those assumptions were correct, what wasn't taken into consideration was what return based on the company's historical profit margins, profitability, all those type of things that were in place. So it was a hard decision to swallow, but the project got basically stopped for all the right reasons, because if we would have gone forward and with that big investment and found that the profitability wasn't up to expectations, it would have been too late. So really want to do your upfront due diligence to make sure you get the buy-in from top management and ownership before you go forward, and that comes through the ROI. Next slide. So another key factor, let's talk about location and site or sites. I think it's important not just to look at, this is again coming out where you have to look at all the external stakeholders, shareholders, everybody that's involved, especially is concerns of the community in governmental agencies. You want to make sure you have community stewardship. Are you welcome there? The growth and viability in the community. You don't want to move into an area that is on a decline and people are moving out, and you don't have the the growth opportunity. Even though it might be less expensive, you want to make sure you're going into a viable area. You want that governmental support. And you need to be asking for things such as tax incentives. Get a little competition going in that area. You want them to get their buy-in and help support the growth of a new facility or an expanding facility. You want support from the governmental agencies as it relates to worker training. Are there opportunities in the community, or is there support coming from the government agencies that they'll help fund and support you in worker training that can be a big advantage with your employees and your business? And then there's also business factors you want to consider, such as how close are you? What's your proximity to your customers, as well as your suppliers? You don't want to build a facility that's out in no man's land, and you don't have your freight costs, your service levels, both your supplier and customer base makes it much more difficult to do business. You want to have a good labor pool available. I'm sure your business requires skilled labor and technical resources. You want to make sure that's truly there for you in the community that you're going to be part of. You want to be a partner, if you will, with local politicians and the politics and the trip points you might have to be concerned with as far as being, a member of that area, if you will. And then obviously transportation and logistics, such as local warehousing. What's those supply chain advantages you might be able to have by being in a certain area? Trucking companies, even rail, if you're involved in rail. That could be something that's attractive to you, and just making sure you're on a good routing point to get your product in and out and back to your customers. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about how important it is to do the due diligence and on the bigger picture, but you also want to make sure you're doing that on your design of your facility and the layout of the design. My suggestion is you go back for anybody that has the Six Sigma understanding, and even if you don't have a Six Sigma, green belt, black belt, or whatever, you take a lean approach to lay out your facility and is minimal steps with an effective line layout to make it as effective as possible. Things such as you want to optimize your material flow. I like to use workflow diagrams so you can see that and follow that through from cradle to grave, how that product's going to flow through your plant, and designing that to meet those is important. You minimize your production bottlenecks. What are those things that you think of before you put the assets in place? And you want to plan for an expansion. You don't want to piecemeal if possible. If you can say, for example, you're building a facility, you might only fill that with assets at a certain rate, say 50% to start. But rather than continually build new buildings, you lay it out saying that, in year 3, in year 5, in year 7, we're going to add assets to complete a more longer term. So look at that thing in a more longer term view. Obviously, machinery placement, back to the lean and efficiency side, is important. You want to look at storage areas. How does that connect to your production process? Is there a lean process that takes the product from manufacturing into a storage area so that it's minimizing steps and it's convenient to get back through the back door? Safety. Don't want to get down the road and say we didn't think of safety first in everything we did. It's really important that you go walk through and look at every potential safety near miss type of approach to say what could happen if we didn't lay it out properly. So you want the right people on the team to help you do that. And then you want to make sure that the education, and I'll throw in not only education but skill levels of all the local employees. You want to have a good base to choose from, and that you've got you can build a good team in the area that you're going to be manufacturing. Next slide. So you also want to take a look at alternate processing technologies, maybe different from what you have been doing in your existing facilities. Every time you get a chance to expand and grow and invest, you obviously want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward. If it might be something better, you got to look outside the box, make sure there's no better technologies there as you go forward that's going to increase your productivity. You can look at smart manufacturing technologies. These are just some ideas. Automate systems for productivity, such as looking at robotics, cost reduction opportunities, looking at data analytics, process automation to streamline operations. All these things that maybe you're not currently doing, you can do when you have a chance to use the latest technology. And then you want to support that scalability, like I said. How do you grow in incremental steps and lay that out as part of your investment? So the other opportunity you get is a chance maybe to improve your quality from your existing assets that you've been doing in your existing locations. And I would highly recommend, if you're not already doing a first time right mentality into all you're doing, this is a chance with a new group of people, a new start, to really implement a culture of first time right, where people they get off the ground without bad habits, if you will, or just following past practices. And then you can invest in new quality equipment and technology might be out there. And I just use the example I know in the processing businesses I've been involved in, especially in converting for vision cameras, for example, where you can put vision cameras in that are going to identify deformance, non-conformances in the process in line rather than kind of catching it after the fact. Next slide. So back to the workforce, we talked about that and how important that is. This is where I would highly recommend, if you don't have human resources in your group, but most people do, either using it from an internal or an external standpoint, this is when you really want to get them involved and get involved in the community outreach. You want to go through that core exercise, bottom up, performance skills and labor assessment for your new and expanded facility. You're going to be hiring new people, and you really want to make sure you have a pool to pick from. You want to identify the training requirements to enact. Like I told you before, sometimes you can get government to help subsidize that, but you definitely want to make sure that you're putting together a robust training process and program for your employees. You want to determine if additional leadership, maybe in the management side, you might be moving somebody from your existing facility to a new facility to run that site because they have the culture of your existing organization as well as maybe the knowledge and expertise. But sometimes you will have to add what I'll call, and not just a labor pool, but some talent in the event of engineering and technical resources of that nature. Again, consider the workforce development programs. What can be done to constantly drive a continuous improvement culture and develop your people that want to stay at your organization? You want people to come in and look at your company. I always like to say it's a career, it's not a job. If you can get those workforce development programs to support that kind of culture, you're going to have a much more longer term and more robust group of team there. And then look at your talent retention strategies. Why do people want to work at your organization? You're getting people who are, again, looking at this thing in the long term and want a career rather than just a job. There's things you can put in place. For example, you want to develop employee morale and productivity incentives. I mean, they can be non-monetary or productivity incentives with payouts such as profit sharing. I always say, it's great that you might want to put some backing in there financially when it comes to employee morale, but just good fundamental management practice, giving people recognition, letting them know that they're important in your culture. Those are the kind of things you really want to be doing to attract and retain the kind of people you want to grow with in that community. And then the other thing, as I always say, it's a not invented here syndrome. Sometimes people always want to just look inside the four walls as the way they do it. I get input from outside, and that includes local businesses. You're going into an area, you've got like a chamber of commerce is one resource to get into some of those groups and work with some of those local businesses and see what they've already learned so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel and learn it yourself. They can sometimes tip you off into some of the things they did and would do differently if they were in your shoes. So those are kind of some core things I would be looking to do when it comes to the human resources and building a team. Next slide. So another consideration, your supply chain management. You want to make sure, as I mentioned earlier, that you're in an area where getting product from a raw material standpoint, as well as getting it out the door to your customers, is optimal, is possible, taking all the other things into consideration. So you really want to first get back to those, baseline type discussions and reviews where you're looking at your existing supply chain inefficiencies. What are things that you're currently doing and you're saying, if we had a new facility, how would we do this differently? And you drive those in your new acquisition and or expansion of your facility. Obviously, you want to remove any bottlenecks or risks associated with production. That again, cradle to grave mentality of material flow. You want to make sure that's in place. You want to integrate your supply chain strategy with suppliers. A couple examples of that would be, you might be able to do a just-in-time, for example, strategy that you have, and even getting them linked into your MRP system. Things that really get the supplier as a partner in your production process that maybe you're not doing today. The other thing is warehousing. You might be able to, if you really want to take a lean approach with your existing warehouse, you might be able to get your suppliers to warehouse product for you. Maybe some kind of an inventory program where they're carrying your inventory, and you can work out through release plans with your MRP process. So this gives you a new opportunity to work new advantageous kind of approaches with your suppliers. Obviously, you want to effectively manage your inventory levels. Don't want to have overproduction. You want to have the right production and right levels. Cash flow is important, and most companies are going to take a really close eye and not tying up their working capital with excessive inventory levels. So make sure you're optimizing in that area. And then the sourcing of raw materials. This gives you a chance if maybe you have a chance to partner with a new supplier. Who maybe you couldn't use in the past because of where they were located in conjunction with your new location. So it gives you a chance to open up and take a look at who else can we bring into our raw material and supplier portfolio. And then I think the most important one is understanding and meeting your customer delivery requirements. Last thing you want to have happen is you build a facility and you take a step backwards as it relates to your customers' delivery standards. So make sure you really take a hard look at that and make sure that that's in line with your customer satisfaction agenda. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about safety, and I'll even broaden it to say, one of the things when you're building a facility, you really want to make sure that your EH&S considerations are not overlooked. And what are the kind of things? This isn't everything. This is an all-inclusive list, but at a minimum, I would recommend that as far as regulation and laws you follow, and you're looking at all the federal, state, and local requirements as you build your facility and or acquire another facility. You want to make sure as part of that your permitting is in line, and that's in conjunction with your whole manufacturing strategy. Your safety standards need to be in place. The government agencies such as OSHA and EPA, for example, you want to make sure that those are all in check and you're not second guessing after the fact. And then you also want to consider sustainability. This might be a chance with a new facility to take a bump up in your manufacturing process with the carbon footprint reduction culture. I know being on the commercial side in my career, there were many times where, and still, and more so today probably than in the past, where you come down and you're up against a competitor, and it comes down to who has the everything may be neutral as far as price, service, but then they look at your carbon footprint. It's kind of like that tiebreaker. This gives you a chance to come into the business with leapfrog your competition. And as far as the carbon footprint and things such as waste generation, your energy efficiency, and then the environmental impact mitigation. That all those things are key, to give you a competitive edge in the marketplace, and building a new facility would give you that opportunity to do it. Next slide. So, like I said earlier, all great plans never, I won't say never, but there are times, as we all know, that great plans don't always go as we would like. You want to have a contingency and a risk management plan in place just in case. Now, that can be built as you go, but you need to take some of those things in consideration as you're building your plan. Things that will happen through the course of a business cycle. You're going to have market swings and volatility in your business. You might have supply chain disruptions, even force majeure due to disasters and the like. Technological obsolescence, things that are working well today, for some reason, they become obsolete, and you got to take that into consideration in your planning. Regulatory changes, governmental policies, depending on what's happening as far as the political side of things change. I mentioned natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, fires. Those types of things all need to be taken into consideration when you're building, and acquiring your facility. Yeah, financial uncertainties. What happens if we go through a massive recession and/or depression? What can be done to mitigate those types of events, which through, again, the course of a business can and will happen. And then the attitude of the local government and media. You really want to make sure you're doing everything to be good, corporate citizens, with the government and the media. Reach out to them through your PR initiatives, all those types of things to become, what I'll call a welcoming and good neighbor, rather than not knowing who your government and media, friends are. Next slide. So, as all projects, we're going to talk a little bit about the fundamentals of the project management, of putting a plan in place and then making sure that that plan is working. You want to have project timelines and deliverables in those projects. You want to have your key milestones, and I always like to say too, it's not only having the key milestones when you hit them, reward and celebrate a little bit when you hit them, to keep the momentum on, you keep the morale up of those that are in charge of keeping you on track. Resource allocation. Do you have the right team and the right people and resources behind your project management? Coordination of your stakeholders. Very important to have your stakeholders on board. Communication. You're going to get credibility through your deliverables much easier when there's good communication at all levels, up and down the organization, to keep them on track of what's happening with the project. Your construction contractors, are you working in good graces with them, as far as making sure you've got good relationships, just like you treat your own employees? You want to attempt to have that same relationship with your contractors. Equipment suppliers, regulatory agencies. And then, you do the what ifs. You brainstorm with your team and say, what could go wrong in our project plan, and you lay those contingencies out, and you prepare for them. So if something does happen, you're not starting from scratch and say, uh-oh, what do we do now? You say, I'm glad we prepared for this. We lay out some of those what ifs, and we have a plan, and it again, it can mitigate some of the problems by first thinking about it on the front end rather than the back end. Next slide. So, you want to think strategically and plan for long-term scalability. How do you do that? It comes back to some of those discussions or the comments I made earlier, in making sure in your due diligence process you have a pretty good grasp of what the future growth is in the market, what your customers are telling you, the commitments they're making to you, formally or even informally. And then, you take that, all that information, and again, that should give you much better feel and expansion, understanding for your future growth and analytics and forecasting. So you're going into it with some knowledge, and you did your homework. You want to design the facility and the assets with flexibility and scalability in mind. Again, back to that long-term vision. Lay out the year 1, the year 5, the year 10 potentially of how your plant is going to develop based on all that market information and growth information that you put into the front end of the process. And then you allow for future modifications or capacity upgrades as needed, again, with minimal investments. The planning can't be underestimated that goes into the front end. And again, it's based on those assumptions, but the assumptions that you've made, if they're been well thought out, it's going to put you in a much better place as you build your plant for the long term. Next. So you also want to consider those technical requirements, and I like to say best-in-class operations. You want to use the internal knowledge, but you also want to be looking outside the box as far as with new technology as well. Some of those, and again, this is just one business, one facility with certain processes. Your business may be slightly different, so this is not by any means meant to be a all-encompassing set of guidelines, but it's one that I think for some of the businesses that could apply. And those, for example, would be you develop your process models of your existing operations, for example, in the reaction, separation, and storage side of things. If you're increasing capacity, you want to make sure you have kinetic and mass transfer data to model processing needs for new reactor capacity. All those that kind of build on each other are important to talk about and really dig into. Ensure that adequate support equipment and utilities are considered. Again, all those planning type things. Is the plant layout able to meet increased demand and have space to handle increases in inventory? Again, if you're going to increase your supply and your product, you have the warehouse space to handle the inventory that goes with it, so that you're not going out and saying, oh, now we have to build another warehouse. Again, not planned on. You want to confirm sufficient milling capabilities, for example. Ensure sufficient appropriate dispersion capabilities. Explore the potential of in-process quality checks, monitoring, on and on. I think the in-process quality checks versus maybe it allows you to build quality into the product. So who knows, maybe you can do it with minimal or even no QC on the back end of the process because you've got an inline process that's reliable. That saves costs, and it's back to a first time right mentality of building quality into the product. Next slide. Yeah, continuing on with considering all the what I'll call best-in-class operations. When you have hazardous materials that are used, will an increase in the capacity require some improved ventilation? Are sprinkler systems in place for fire hazards? Inspection of facilities by state and local authorities. Don't ignore the external view of all those things. And then changes in permitting. All these things need to be carefully thought out before taking that step. If you're taking over an older facility, sometimes there may be some things that are outdated. So, for example, in the process safety and you want to access issues that were likely grandfathered in over the years. Grandfathering may or not be valid depending on if regulations and certain things change. So you want to take a look at upgrading your access points to current regulations. You want to inspect for things like asbestos, upgrade locker areas, bathrooms, etc. All these things should be taken into consideration when you're putting in a new facility. Next slide. So we're talking mostly about building new and expanding with a new facility. There are times when you may take on a existing facility. You may purchase, for example, from a competitor or a business that's already functioning, but you're buying the assets already in place. So it gives you a chance. Some of the same fundamentals you want to go through, but a little different because you're not building it, but you're really, confirming that those what you're buying is the is what you're paying for. For example, I look at it almost like when you buy a new home, you go through a home inspection. This is very similar, obviously at a much higher level of technical requirements involved with a plant, but kind of the same mindset to do your due diligence. So some of the things you would take a look at building when you buy an existing building would be perform your due diligence of all properties, buildings, assets. Like I said, similar to a home. You want to complete a full inspection, especially in the EH and S categories. You don't want any, as we say, skeletons in the closet, if you will, when you're buying a new business and find out after the fact that maybe you had a groundwater problem underneath, or from that side, from the environmental side. That will be just an extreme example. You don't want to do a financial evaluation, making sure that the property values and assets are in line with what you are paying for it. This is when you really want to get your accounting group involved, if at all possible. They can really help you in that regard. Sorry, we go to the next slide, Marcus. Yep. I think we went back one. Okay, next one. We went back, Marcus. Just go a couple. Hey, keep going. Okay. Okay, one slide back. One more. Okay, that right there. Perfect. Thank you. So as I mentioned down on the third bullet below there, it's important to get your accounting or controlling group involved. When you're buying a new business and you have existing assets, one of the things you're going to have to do is revalue your assets based on what you paid for it, and those will have to be reallocated to all the different assets. So you're going to need help from the finance group to do that, not only from the financial reasons, there's tax reasons and all kind of other reasons that we're not going to get into, but it's important to do that in conjunction with your experts in finance. And then, as I say all the time, as part of your business transformation, make sure your customers that require change are in agreement. Last thing you want to have happen is where you didn't communicate and get agreement from a customer on some of the things that they're going to require. Something as simple as moving from machine to machine, or a new buyer coming in. That's part of change management, and they're going to require that. I would take it one step further, that not only those that require written documentation, I think it makes total sense to alert all your customers of what you're doing, and if there are any concerns, you address it before you get down the path and they're saying, sorry, but I can't take product from you because we didn't have an agreement in place beforehand. Next slide. So I'm going to close out the last slide here with take everything we talked about and let's just go from the other side. Let's just say, instead of growing a business and buying a business, what if you were on the other side where you are divesting or selling a business? It basically is just the opposite. So you're selling a facility to a potential buyer. For me, it's important that you really are fully transparent regarding the information provided in the sale. No different than you would be if you were buying it. These are the things you would do on the opposite side. You want to avoid potential concerns. Anticipate what those buyers' questions will be in advance. Be prepared. You want to stay on schedule, meeting all deliverables to include open communications and project status. And I think setting up some kind of a formal schedule as well as informal schedule on how the project's going, or you're on time, so that there's no surprises or disruptions down the road. Be approachable and on call as needed. Kind of common sense, but you don't want to be in a vacuum and have it be too distant from the buyer. And then I think, again, I always throw the customers in here too, is you really want to make sure there's a smooth customer transition with the deliveries are not interrupted. and there's an ultimate plan in place just in case, because the last thing you want is have a major disruption in the business with your customers, because you can end up losing them or at least a dissatisfied customer at a minimum if you're not careful with how you want to handle those you handle those deliveries and making sure they're comfortable with that. Okay, next slide. So with that, that concludes the presentation. I hopefully that was there was something good insights there for all of you. But at this point, we'd like to take some questions, and feel free to reach out to any of us. The four of us that are here representing ChemQuest today would be more than happy to get back to you with anything. But for now, let's turn it over and see if there's any questions we can answer to the audience.
Thanks, pardon me. Thanks, Bob. It's Marcus. We'll go ahead and jump in here. And we do have a comment. And someone just wanted to add that cutting back waste, such as low quality equipment and efficient workflows, will help our companies save money and streamline production. All right, first question. What is the common issue you have? What is the most common issue you have seen related to the expansion of an existing site or development of a new site?
Okay. Pete, you want to handle that one? You've got some pretty extensive experience. And then Joel, I'd like to hear your comment too. You guys have both been very involved in plant startups. So Pete, why don't you take a shot at that one?
Okay, thanks, Bob. It's a good question, and it brings up, in a lot of respects, that you kind of look at the two of those as different approaches, an existing site versus a new site. But one of the things you need to keep in mind overall, whether it's a new site or an existing site, is you really need to look at the optimization or what you can do to get the most efficiencies out of what you currently have. Many times, you get lulled into a sense that you've got a good process going, that there's really not much you can do to improve it, and we need to just put some more of the same in. That's really a problem because you really miss opportunities to improve your process, to improve your capabilities and your capacity. So the main thing is really looking at the optimization of what your existing assets are, because that becomes critical as you go forward. If you've optimized what you've got, what your existing process is, then as you put the additional equipment in, you're now putting in equipment that is optimized as well. The second part of that occurs many times in both of them is space, because what happens is sites get built for the process or the business you have right now. You are now going to put some expansion, whether it's 25% or 30 or 40% expansion, but you literally don't have the space to put the equipment in a good location near or adjacent to your existing equipment. So what you end up doing, and you see this on a lot of old sites, is you've got milling on this side of the plant, you've got milling in another area of the plant, and you've got your dispersion split in a couple different spots. There really is a very poor flow, and there's a lot of excess movement of material throughout the plant. So having additional space and planning the additional space when you do your site, even small, but plan additional space on your site, in your operations area, in your storage areas, in all your areas, to be able to deal with expansion as it comes forward.
Thanks, Pete. Joel, you wanna build on that?
Sure. Well, I think to me, the most important thing is find out what the facts are and find out what the assumptions are. Behind every expansion, behind every project, there's a tendency to get assumptions and facts mixed up. And I once had a manager who said that assumption is a four-letter word. Sometimes you don't recognize an assumption as an assumption, and you build something because the assumption was thought to be a fact, and you can stub your toe pretty badly when you try and start up. The other thing is everybody comes into a project such as an expansion with some preconceived notions. The thought is, oh, we always did things this way. Old Joe back there about 30 years ago told me to do it this way. An expansion gives you the opportunity to start with a blank sheet of paper. And the important thing is, don't blow that by using, everything that's been done before. really open your mind and understand you have an opportunity to do things right, using the best technology, using the best minds. Don't repeat the past, or else you're really not going to make any improvements.
And don't fall into the trap of, we've tried that before and it didn't work. Because what you tried 5 years or 10 years ago, technology has changed. The world's moved ahead. There are a lot of opportunities to gain things that you tried before, that you have equipment or changes that have occurred in recent time that will really gain you big steps in your process.
Yeah, I have to second that. Sometimes, typically you always look at the old graybeards, because the old graybeards, have the experience and they can cite chapter and verse about what was done 20, 30 years ago. But sometimes they're your greatest enemy, because they're resistant to change and don't realize it. And what they're remembering, what happened 20 years ago, may be totally irrelevant to what's happening today, and they simply don't see it.
Excellent. Thanks, guys.
And I say
All
that
right.
as a graybeard.
As do I.
All right, next one. When a company is looking to push new technologies, how do you overcome an ROI hurdle when the financial risk that the company is willing to take has not been identified?
So I'll jump in on that one, and I'll let you guys follow up. I've firsthand, as I mentioned in the presentation, have had a pretty significant project that we went down the path for all the right reasons, except for the fact that the hard numbers weren't really discussed early on in the process. And it takes somebody who's maybe independent from that process, because you tend to become like cheerleaders for a project, right? It's just common sense that you want to bore that down. It's hard to say no, or maybe we made a mistake and we got to back out of this. So you need a kind of a third party to come in and say, you know what? I hear what you're saying. I love your heart and your desire and everything to make this work, but the numbers just aren't there. So cut your losses, as we say, take a step back. And, unfortunately, sometimes that requires abandoning the project. That's my take on it, only because I've lived it. But Joel, why don't you give your comments on that as well? And Pete, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, in my history, every project always met its ROI. People are really, really creative in understanding what the ROI hurdle is and making sure that project meets the ROI. I once had a senior manager basically keep a record of the ROIs that were promised on different projects. And 2 years later, he went back to see if the ROIs were actually met. And I think in 1 case out of 10, the ROI was actually accurate. The rest of them were kind of finessed to make them come out better than they really turned out to be. And it represented a tremendous loss to the company. It put resources into a project that really didn't deserve it. So I have to back what Bob said is you got to bring a third party in who doesn't have a vested interest, who didn't sweat over the project, to make sure that your hurdle is actually met. Otherwise, you're going to be in for a very nasty surprise.
I was director of new product development at a couple of companies and responsible for looking at new technologies and alternate technologies. And many times we would find alternate technologies, but we could not meet the ROI hurdle. And it doesn't mean that we turned our back and walked away from them entirely. We just sat there and looked at alternatives. We kept looking at that to see how we can incrementally gain on what we have today. But you really just don't continue to take what you've got now and decide it's the best you could ever have, because you're never going to succeed in that one. You've got to step back from it. You've got to look at what incremental gains you can get and not go for necessarily the home run, but take the single.
Very good. Thanks, guys.
All right, moving on. Our plant expansion, our plant expansion success depends on improving our current technology. How do we couple our RD and engineering staffs to the overall plan?
Joel, you want to take that one with your background in the technical side?
Well, the easiest way to do that is to divide up your R&D and divide up your engineering staffs into small teams. And if each team concentrate on a specific portion of the plant, you have one group concentrating on reaction, one group concentrating on separations and purification, one plant on waste disposal, If your groups are too sprawling, you'll find them stepping on each other, having contradictory goals, and basically wasting lots of energy. If you have small concentrated teams that look at one portion of the plant, you're going to come out a lot more successful.
Good. Pete, any comments?
My main comment to that goes is communication. Keeping people informed, letting them know what the goal is and what the incremental steps are you're looking for in there. It often becomes hard for everyone has competing views of what they think success is. You've got to get a success defined for the team, for everybody as part of it, and keep everybody informed on what's happening. There's got to be a leader, but there's got to be a team, not just a leader.
Thank you.
All right, next one. How and when do you begin to notify customers of change control, as many customers require prior notification and then approval before agreeing to a product from a new or different facility or product line or production line?
I'll take that one. As I talked a little bit about that during the presentation, and I have some experience in this, in starting up a facility, and actually was the medical side, but it would be relevant, I think, in the in our any type of operation or business discussion. But what we found out is we made the mistake of only contacting the customers that had formal change control agreements with us, that they need to be notified of change in material, process, line. We ignored those customers, if you will, that didn't have formal agreements, and that was a big mistake. We found after the fact that we should have notified customers across the board of what we were doing and be completely transparent. It was viewed by management, myself included in that it would have been too cumbersome. And if we had to go through that exercise, but like I said, I committed a mistake when a mistake was made, and we should have made that communication on the front end with everybody. So to answer the question, I guess what I would say is my preference, while not 100% required legally to notify everybody, as far as great customer relations and really credibility, I would let everybody know when, right up front, that we're going to be acquiring a new business. It's going to change this, and this. You should see no difference in your product quality, the whole pitch. But just the fact that you took that energy and notification, I think is going to go a long, longer way than trying to look at it differently. Pete and Joel, you have anything else to add to that?
Oh boy, do I have a bunch of horror stories about that. You can't notify customers too early that you're going to make a change, because they have to get their own R&D and engineering geared up to evaluate the new product. They've got to form teams to make sure that the change that you make or the process change you make is not going to have a bad effect on the final product. I was working for a company that was making filtration membrane using polyether sulfone. And this was company X. Company X was sued by company Y for patent infringement. And to get around it, they added a mystery compound that enabled them to evade the patents. But they didn't tell anybody that they did that. And suddenly we were finding our membrane no longer behaved the same way. Everything was different. All our processes were completely out of control. And when we confronted company X, they said, "Oh yeah, we added a little bit of this compound, and it shouldn't have any effect on what you're doing." And yeah, for the vast majority of applications, it was a no-brainer. For our application, it was fatal, and it gave me guaranteed employment in R&D for about 5 years, because I had to requalify all our products with this new material.
I think one of the things that's important in any of this is to notify customers of any change, whether it's something as simple as labeling or the container, because even if there's not a product change, if you just put it in a different 5-gallon pail or different drum, if they see a difference on the outside, they're going to assume there's a difference on the inside. So it's really important to just keep customers informed, keep them aware of what you're doing. And as Joel said, you don't want surprises coming back to bite you later.
All right, so we have one more question, but I just want to, we're at the top of the hour, so members, we understand if you need to hop off. I want to check in with our presenters to see if you can do one more question. This will take us a couple of minutes over
Sure.
the
No
hour.
problem.
All right, we'll go ahead and get this one in. How do you get ownership to see the workflow if the plant needs change?
You want to jump on that one? That sounds right up your alley.
Could you repeat the question, Marcus?
Sure. How do you get ownership to see the workflow? And I believe that's supposed to be if the plant needs change.
Okay, and there are a number of ways to do that. Probably the biggest is to gather data, understand, so that you can present a logical approach as to why things need to change. Gather data on what the inefficiencies are today, what issues you can solve and address, and what you can solve on your proposed change. Optimization is about continuous improvement and evolving. You don't want to try and put these huge step changes in, but more than likely you're better off taking incremental changes and moving the needle slowly forward. That's the best way to get the management to buy into it and to see the changes, because a lot of times going for those big changes, there's always a risk or a fear. I shouldn't say a risk. There's always a fear of a risk of problems, rather than feeling that it's going to go very smooth. So from my perspective, what I would say is that you need to build your case, build your, understand what you're trying to solve, and present data and hard facts as to what the changes will be, what they will gain, and what the overall financial impact will be, or productivity or throughput improvements.
Designer, are you good with that?
Well, let me just add that there's a psychological component too. If you're talking about, an expansion or a change, the prison management team may not be around when these are implemented. And they're seeing it saying, wait a second, you're asking me to lay out all these capital dollars that's going to affect my ROI and maybe affect my stock options. And yet I won't see the benefit because I may not be in this position when these things come on board. So you need to be able to overcome that, understand the psychology, and understand where the opposition might be coming from and why. A little bit of counterintelligence is very, very useful here.
Excellent. Good. I have nothing to add. That was great, guys. Appreciate that.
All right, thank you all. And we are after the top of the hour, so we'll wrap this up as quickly as possible. I want to thank our friends at ChemQuest, Bob Kramer, Pete Smith, Joel Sherlock, Edie Fox Abrams, make sure I got everybody in here, and Susan Sutton. Did I miss anyone? I think I got all of you for this one. Thank you all so much for putting this presentation on for our members this afternoon. Pardon me, we'll be on hiatus for the month of August. I love that word. Going to be on hiatus for the month of August. No webinars, but we'll be back in September. When I distribute these slides this afternoon, you'll see the rest of the series for ChemQuest. They're noted on there. And in the general session, we'll pick up on September the 7th. We'll have a plastics and packaging webinar that'll be presented by ACA staff here, Heidi McAuliffe and Suzanne Chang, both in government affairs. And on September the 12th, we'll be bringing back our state affairs updates. And we have 6 of those over the course of the fall for you. The first one will cover Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. And we'll have California on September the 26th. These are all listed on paint.org, under the Member Center and in the events section, where you can always register for these webinars. And that schedule for the fall will fill out as we approach the fall. Again, I'll distribute these slides this afternoon. The recording will be available soon on paint.org. And thank you for hanging around this afternoon, and we'll see you in September for our full slate of virtual meetings and webinars. All right, have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.